I hold in my hands a yellowed map on which a small area in the Transcarpathian Mountains is circled in red pencil. The date in the margin is March 1944. This map was given to me by old man Vasil from the village of Solotvino when I arrived there last fall. My grandfather found it in the woods, he said in Ukrainian, when the Germans were moving in. His grandfather had found this map in the woods when the Germans were retreating. It all started with a small article in a regional newspaper. Tourists found strange wartime objects in an abandoned ADIT. I have been working as a journalist for 20 years, and usually such news doesn't attract attention. But something about this story caught my eye. Perhaps it was the mention that the items found do not correspond to the known facts about the occupation of the region. Getting to Solotvino is not easy. The narrow road winds between hills covered with dense spruce forest. The village is located in a valley where salt was once mined, hence the name. Now about 300 people live here, mostly pensioners and a few families with children. Young people leave for the cities. Vasil Horvat, 83 years old, met me at the gate of his house. He is short, gaunt, with intelligent gray eyes. He speaks a mixture of Ukrainian and Russian, sometimes inserting Hungarian words. Here, on the border of three countries, languages mix naturally. "Are you here because of those tourists?" he asked, inviting me into the house. There was already tea and homemade bread on the table. I thought someone was coming. This story has been bugging me for a long time. It turned out that Vasil had been studying the history of his native land all his life. He has a whole library of books, documents, and photographs at home. The walls are hung with old maps. And among all this is the very map with the red mark. "My grandfather Mikola has been telling me this story since I was a child," Vasil began. "He worked as a forester under the Austro-Hungarians, then under the Czechoslovaks, then under the Hungarians. He knew the forest like his own home. And in March of the 44th year, when the front was approaching our place, he saw something strange in the forest. According to Mikola's grandfather, on the morning of March 15th, 1944, he went to check the winter damage in the forest. He was walking along a familiar path to the old salt mines. There were tunnels cut in the 19th century. Suddenly, I heard voices. German speech. Grandfather understood German," Vasil continued, "since the Austrian times. And he felt someone talking about the paintings, about the joint, about the need to finish work quickly. Mikola hid behind the trees and watched. Near the entrance to the Adit No 107, that's how the old workings were numbered, stood German soldiers. Not ordinary infantrymen, but some kind of specialists. They had boxes, measuring tools, a lot of documents. One of them, judging by the patches, was an SS officer. Grandpa sat up until evening watching them, Vasil recounted. They were taking something into the Adit, something out of there, and then they disappeared. The next day, Mikola returned to the Adit. No one was there. The entrance was blocked with stones, but not thoroughly. Rather hastily, he dismantled the rubble and went inside. In the depths of the Adit lay scattered papers, a few empty boxes, and fresh traces of an explosion at the far end of the gallery. But the strangest thing, Vasil leaned toward me, lowering his voice. My grandfather said that on the day the Germans worked in the Adit, none of them returned to the village, and the next day their bodies were found in the woods. All 7 of them, with gunshot wounds. I asked him to show me the place. Vasil agreed, but he warned me that it was necessary to walk to the Adit. The road was difficult, and not everything was safe. The next morning we set off into the forest. We walked for almost an hour along a narrow path, climbing higher and higher into the mountains. The forest became thicker, the trees older. Sometimes there were ruins of some buildings, remnants of logging or salt mines. This is where Grandpa hid. Vasil pointed to the dense thicket behind a large fir tree. From here, the clearing in front of the Adit entrance was clearly visible. The entrance is an arched hole in the rock, partially overgrown with moss and shrubs. We went inside. The Adit went 50 meters deep into the mountain. The walls were bare rock with some wooden supports. The air smelled of dampness and something else, metal, gunpowder. At the far end, there were indeed traces of an explosion. Collapsed rock, cracks in the walls. And this is what the tourists found. Vasil shined his flashlight into a niche to the right of the entrance. There, under a layer of stones and debris, were some metal objects. I bent down and saw parts of German military equipment, a belt buckle, a few buttons, and a fragment of a helmet. But what struck me the most was the palm-sized metal plaque. It was engraved with German words: Ahnenerbe Forschung, Project Bernstein, Merits 1944, Ancestral Heritage, Research, Project Amber, March 1944, Ahnenerbe. I knew the name. Ancestral Heritage, a pseudo-scientific SS organization that searched for occult artifacts and proof of Nazi racial theory. Their expeditions were legendary: Tibet, Antarctica, the search for Atlantis, and the Holy Grail. Project Amber didn't tell me anything, but if the Ahnenerbe was working here, in the remote Carpathian Mountains, it means they were looking for something very important. Or they were hiding it. When I returned to the village, I tried to find someone else who remembered the wartime. Vassal put me in touch with Maria Stefan, who is 90 years old. She lived in a neighboring village and remembered the spring of 1944 well. The Germans behaved strangely then, she said, sitting in a chair near the stove. Usually they stayed in the district center and rarely came to us. But then suddenly some scientists in military uniforms appeared. They asked the old people about local legends about the old mines. According to her, the Germans were particularly interested in stories about the gold of the Huns, a local legend that says that somewhere in the mountains, the treasures of the nomads are hidden. The old men told them about the salt mines and the tunnels where they sometimes found strange objects. And then they disappeared, Maria continued. Just disappeared. A day later, partisans from the forest brought news that they had found dead Germans. They said they had been shot by their own men. Your own. That was strange. Desertion in the SS was punishable by death, but an entire research team? I decided to dig deeper. In the regional archive, I found wartime documents, mostly reports of partisan detachments. And there, in the report of March 18, 1944, it was written, "In the area of Solotvino village, the bodies of 7 German soldiers were found, presumably killed as a result of an internal conflict. There are no documents with the dead." Internal conflict. That phrase had been bugging me. What could have happened in a squad of Ahnenerbe researchers to make them start killing each other? I found the answer in the most unexpected place, in the memoirs of Soviet intelligence officer Alexei Volkov, published in a small edition in the 1970s. Volkov worked in Transcarpathia in 1943-1944, coordinating the actions of partisan units. He wrote only a few pages about the events in Solotvino, but they turned my whole understanding of history upside down. According to Volkov, Soviet intelligence knew about the Ahnenerbe's activities in the region in advance. Moreover, they had their own man in the German unit. Non-commissioned officer Erich Müller, an Austrian national, had collaborated with the communists before the war and was recruited by Soviet intelligence in 1942. Müller gave us information about the goals of the expedition. Volkov wrote, "The Germans were not looking for Hun gold, as the locals thought. They were looking for something much more valuable for the war effort." Volkov did not specify what exactly, but his notes showed that on March 15, 1944, the Soviet intelligence plan was put into action. Müller was ordered to prevent the Germans from removing what they had found at any cost. I decided to find descendants of Erich Müller. The search took several weeks, but eventually, through the Austrian archives, I was able to contact his niece, Herta Müller, who lives in Vienna. The 87-year-old woman agreed to meet with me. "Uncle Eric never talked about the war," she said, serving me coffee in her small apartment. "He came home in 1945 a very different man. Silent, withdrawn. Mom said the war had broken him. But there were some things Gerda remembered. After the war, Eric had worked as a geologist, and sometimes when he drank, told strange stories about cursed gold and how some treasures are better left in the ground. He showed me a picture once." Gerda stood up and brought out an old album. "Here, look." The black and white photograph showed a man in a German uniform standing near the entrance to a cave or adit. The face was familiar. I had seen it on Erich Müller's pre-war documents. But what struck me most of all was what he held in his hands, a strangely shaped golden object covered with incomprehensible symbols. "Uncle said it was a picture from the Carpathians," Gerda went on, "and that this object brought only misfortune to all who touched it." I asked for a copy of the photo and returned to Ukraine with more questions. What did the Germans find in the Adet number 107? Why was it so important to the Ahnenerbe? And most importantly, what happened to what was found? The answers began to take shape when I turned to an expert on the history of the Ahnenerbe, Dr. Klaus Steiner of the University of Munich. He had been studying the activities of this organization for 30 years and knew things about Project Amber that had not made it into the open archives. Project Amber was one of the most secretive ventures of the Ahnenerbe, he explained to me over the phone. Duskor, they were looking for artifacts from the Scythian and Sarmatian cultures, which they believed could support theories about the ancient Germanic presence in Eastern Europe. But this was only the official version. According to Steiner, the Ahnenerbe leadership was interested in specific items, gold plates with ancient symbols which, according to legend, had special properties. There are documents indicating that in 1943 the Ahnenerbe received information about the discovery of such plates in Transcarpathia. Steiner continued, a local collaborator gave them the information that in one of the salt tunnels there is a treasure of Scythian time. A collaborator. I asked for details and Steiner gave me a name. Ivan Bandurka, a history teacher from Uzhgorod who in 1943 began collaborating with the German occupation authorities. It was difficult to find information about Bandurka. After the war he disappeared and nothing is known about his fate. But the archives of the regional museum preserved his pre-war works on the history of the region. And in one of his articles, published in 1940, he wrote about finding gold objects in the Solet Vino salt mines. In 1887, salt workers discovered a cache of ancient objects in one of the adits, Bandurka wrote. Among them were gold plates with mysterious signs which the locals believed to be magical. The plates were given to the Budapest Museum, but in 1920, after the collapse of Austria-Hungary, they disappeared. Gone, but not for good. Apparently someone returned them to the adit or stashed them elsewhere nearby. And in 1943, Bandurka, who was studying local archives, learned the exact location of the treasure. When I returned to Solet Vino, I told Vasil about my findings. The old man listened attentively, sometimes nodding. Yeah, Grandpa talked about the gold plates too, he said. Only he thought they were just legends. And here's the interesting thing. Vasil was silent, gathering his thoughts. After the war, some people from Moscow came to our village. In civilian clothes, but clearly military. They asked about the Germans, about what they were looking for in the adit. They even offered money for information. Soviet intelligence was also interested in the find. This explained a lot of things. If the gold plates really had some value, historical, cultural, or even military, the search for them continued after the war. Did they find anything? I asked. I don't know, Vasil replied. But after a few years, the adit was officially closed. They said it was dangerous, that it might collapse. But in fact, they just welded the entrance with a metal grate. We went back to the adit. Vasil was right. The old arched entrance was now covered with thick metal bars, rusted from time. But the grating had been installed carelessly, and there was a gap at the bottom, just enough to squeeze through. I reached into my backpack for my flashlight and suddenly felt Vasil grab my arm. Listen, he whispered. Sounds came from deep down in the tunnel. Not the echo of our footsteps, something else. Muffled voices, the scraping of metal against stone. Someone was inside. We froze, listening. The sounds were repeated at irregular intervals, a metallic scraping, then silence, then scraping again. And voices. They spoke in Russian, but it was impossible to make out the words. Who could it be? I whispered. Vasil shook his head. I don't know. No one goes here. Even tourists avoid this place after the rumors went around that it wasn't safe. We cautiously moved closer to the bars. The voices could be heard more clearly now. Two men were discussing something technical, depth, soil, a metal detector. I realized that someone was excavating in the adit. We squeezed through the gap in the grate and moved slowly into the depths. I covered the light of the flashlight with my hand so as not to give away our presence. Vasil followed me, breathing heavily. At the far end of the adit, where the explosion had once occurred, two powerful searchlights were burning. In their light, three middle-aged men were working. One had a metal detector in his hands, and the other two were digging with shovels, removing the rubble. There's something here, the one with the metal detector said. The signal's strong. Dig to the left. I tried to see their faces, but the bright light made it difficult. Their clothes were ordinary: work jackets, rubber boots. There were backpacks and some equipment nearby. "How long have we been digging?" one of the diggers asked tiredly. Uh, maybe there's nothing there?" "There is," the one with the device answered confidently. "The papers don't lie. There must be a hiding place here." Documents. So these people knew something specific. Not random treasure hunters, but an organized group with a specific purpose. Suddenly, the metal detector went silent. The man leaned over, scrutinizing the device. "Stop. Here." The other two approached him. Now all three of them were digging in the same place, carefully breaking up the stones and earth. Suddenly, one of them exclaimed, "That's it!" He picked up something small, gleaming in the spotlight, a golden object the size of a book, covered in patterns. "First plate," said the man with the metal detector. "Keep looking. According to the paperwork, there should be 5. 5 gold plates." I remembered Bandurka's article, the photo from Herta Miller's album, the stories of the locals. All the pieces of the mosaic were coming together. But who are these people, and where did they get the documents with the exact location? The answer came suddenly. One of the diggers straightened up, wiping sweat from his forehead, and I saw his face. I knew this man. Andriy Kostenko, an employee of the Institute of Archaeology of the National Academy of Sciences of Ukraine. We met at a conference 2 years ago. So this is an official expedition? But then why the secrecy? Why work at night in a closed adit? "Andrei Dmitrievich," I called softly, stepping out of the shadows. All three of them turned around sharply. Kostenko recognized me, and I could see from his face that he was not happy about the meeting. "What are you doing here?" he asked sharply. "Investigative journalism," I replied as calmly as possible. "And you?" Kostenko glanced at his comrades. Then he sighed heavily. "Come on in. But first, no photos or recordings. This is a classified operation." A classified operation? In peacetime? In the Ukraine? I was beginning to realize that I had gotten into a bigger story than I thought. "We are working on an assignment from the SBU," Kostenko explained as we approached the excavation site. 3 months ago, we were asked to find and seize historical treasures that may be of interest to foreign intelligence services. Foreign intelligence services. So gold plates were not only of interest to the Nazis 80 years ago. "Which intelligence services exactly?" I asked. "Russian," one of Kostenko's companions replied briefly. "They have information that there are artifacts hidden here that can be used for propaganda purposes, to substantiate historical claims to Ukrainian lands." Everything fell into place. Gold plates with Scythian symbols are not just archaeological finds. In the hands of propagandists, they can become proof of the old Russian presence on the territory of modern Ukraine, especially in the conditions of war when every historical argument is used to justify territorial claims. "How do you have the exact location information?" I persisted. Kostenko was silent for a moment, then pulled a folder of documents out of his backpack. In 2021, Russian hackers hacked into the archives of the KGB of the Ukrainian SSR, which were kept by the SBU. Among other things, they gained access to reports on the work of Soviet intelligence in Transcarpathia in 1944-1945. There was detailed information about what exactly the Germans were looking for and where it could be located. He showed me a photocopy of a typewritten document from 1945. The report of Lieutenant Colonel Volkov, the same scout whose memoirs I had read. "Agent Alpinist, codename E. Mueller reported that a German expedition discovered a cache of 5 gold plates from the Scythian period," I read. "The plates contain inscriptions in ancient Greek and unknown language. According to a preliminary assessment, they are of exceptional historical value." Next came a technical report on how Mueller accomplished the mission. On March 15, 1944, when the German squad retrieved the plates from the cache, he opened fire on his comrades. He killed 6 of them but was mortally wounded by the 7th, the leader of the expedition, SS Obersturmführer Hans Zimmermann. Zimmermann managed to hide the plates back in the Audit, in a new cache, the coordinates of which he transmitted to the Berlin headquarters of the Ahnenerbe. But the message was intercepted by Soviet intelligence. 2 days later, Zimmerman died of wounds in a field hospital. So the plates have been lying here all this time? I asked. Not all of them. Kostenko pointed to the found object. This one we've already retrieved, but according to the documents, there should be 4 more. They continued their search. The metal detector came to life again, pointing to another point in the rubble. Half an hour later, the archaeologists had a second plate in their hands, then a third. Each was about 20 by 30 centimeters in size, about a centimeter thick. High-grade gold covered with fine carvings, images of animals, people, incomprehensible symbols. On one of the plates, I could make out an inscription in Greek letters. Do you realize what this means? I asked Kostenko. Not yet. We need an expert examination. But tentatively, we can say that this is indeed the Scythian period, EXV 3 centuries BC, perhaps part of a large horde that was hidden during the invasion of the Sarmatians. The fourth plate was found quickly, but the fifth one was searched for until dawn. The metal detector was silent, despite the fact that we had dug through the whole rubble. Maybe it was carried off by more Germans, suggested one of the archaeologists. Or Soviet intelligence, the other added. The report says they thoroughly inspected the adit after the war. But Kostenko did not give up. He methodically examined every square meter of the far end of the adit. Suddenly he stopped near the right wall. And there's another move here, he said. Indeed, behind a rock ledge there was a narrow passage leading even deeper into the mountain. We squeezed through it with flashlights. After about 20 meters, the passage widened into a small cave, and there, in a natural niche in the wall, lay the fifth plate. Next to it were the decayed remains of a leather sack and a few gold coins. A complete set, Kostenko said satisfactorily. Now we can finish up. But I was interested in something else. On the wall of the cave next to the niche, someone had scratched an inscription. In German letters in Gothic script, GZ 1603 to 1944, für das Reich. GZ March the 16th, 1944. For the Reich, Hans Zimmermann. A dying SS man left his last message here. Maybe not just a message. I shone my flashlight into the niche where the plate was. I noticed there was something else underneath. A metal box about the size of a cigarette box. There's something else there, I said to Kostenko. He carefully pulled out the box. Inside was a folded piece of paper and a small key. The paper turned out to be a map. It was hand-drawn, but very detailed. It marked the neighborhood of Solotvino, the adits, the paths in the forest, and across a few kilometers from our location, with the caption, "The main cache, the rest." The rest? So 5 gold plates isn't all the Germans found? What will you do with this information? I asked Kostenko. I'll tell the SBU. Let them decide. But I realized that the decision had already been made. In a few days, new excavations would begin in the forests of Transcarpathia, and there was no telling what else would be found in Hans Zimmermann's main cache. We returned to the village when the sun had already risen over the mountains. Vasil was silent the whole way, thinking about something. At the gate of his house, he stopped and said, "You know, Grandpa was telling the truth. He always said there are some things that are better left in the ground, because they bring bad luck to everyone who touches them." I thought about the fates of the people whose lives intersected with the gold plates. Erich Müller, who became an assassin to fulfill a mission. Hans Zimmermann, who died in a forgotten hospital. Ivan Bondarka, who disappeared after the war. Alexei Volkov, who kept the secret of the special operation all his life. And now modern treasure seekers who think history is just museum pieces and scholarly articles. They do not realize that some finds bear the imprint of human passions, greed, betrayal, hatred. A month after the events in the adit, I received a message from Kostenko. The plates were handed over to the museum and classified. The expert examination showed that they were indeed unique monuments of Scythian culture, but their content was of sensitive nature from the point of view of national security. The main stash was never found, officially because of the inaccuracy of the map. Unofficially, because not only Ukrainian archaeologists worked in the specified place. Vasil died last winter. Before he died, he handed me that map with the red mark, the very one his grandfather had found in 1944. "Let you keep it," he said. "Just don't show it to anyone. Let the earth keep its secrets." I keep this map in my safe along with photographs from the Herta Müller archive and photocopies of documents. Sometimes in the late evenings, I unfold it on the table and think about how many more hiding places the Carpathian Mountains conceal, and whether it is good that some of them remain untouched. Last month, a colleague of mine told me that photos of gold plates from the Transcarpathian find appeared on the internet. They were put up for sale on the black market of antiques for $2 million. The buyer is a private collector from Russia, so the story continues. The gold of the Scythians is on its way again bringing trouble to those who think that the past can be bought and sold. And somewhere in the mountains, in abandoned tunnels and caves, other secrets are sleeping, waiting for their time. And maybe it's better that they stay asleep that way.